Commander Jinwoo stood in the dim light of the command center, his eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the galaxy's current status. The blue glow of the star map reflected off his tired face as he watched the final transmission. From Earthplay for what felt like the 1,000th time, the woman's voice crackled through the speakers, filled with desperation and pain. "This is Admiral Park. ... Seoul defense grid has fallen. They're in the atmosphere. ... Tell the galaxy we. TRIED." Message ended with static, just as it had 3 years ago. Jinwoo closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He remembered that day clearly. The Confederation had been tracking the hegemony's advance toward Earth for weeks, but they arrived too late. By the time their rescue fleet reached the Sol system, there was nothing left but silence. "Sir?" Lieutenant Hannah's voice broke through his thoughts. She was a Valdarian, with blue scales that shimmered under the command center's lights. Her large eyes showed concern as she looked at her commander. "Should we update the memorial records?" Jinwoo opened his eyes and looked at her. Hannah was young, barely out of the academy, but she had already seen 3 worlds fall to the hegemony. Each time, they had to change the markers in their database from yellow to red. Yellow meant hope. Red meant death. "Yes," he said quietly. "Mark Earth is fallen." Hannah's fingers moved across her control panel. On the main display, Earth's marker changed from yellow to red. Another dot of light snuffed out by the hegemony's endless war machine. Jinwoo felt a familiar weight settle on his chest. The humans had been so different from other species they had encountered. They were young, barely 500 years into space travel, but they had a spark that reminded him of his own people's early days. Their first contact protocols had been simple, almost childlike in their eagerness to make friends. When the hegemony began their advance toward human space, Earth's leaders had asked for help with such hope in their voices. The Confederation had promised to send aid, but promises meant nothing when you arrived too late. "They fought hard," Hannah said softly, reading through the battle reports. "The defense satellites held for 3 days. The ground forces kept fighting even after the orbital bombardment started." Jinwoo nodded. The humans had surprised everyone with their determination. Most species surrendered when faced with the hegemony's overwhelming force, not the humans. They had fought until the very end, buying time for civilian evacuations and sending out desperate calls for help that no one could answer. Far away, in the Outer Rim territories, Hegemony Fleet Commander Vexstar was reviewing his own reports. His command ship hung in space above what had once been called Earth, but was now just another supply depot in the hegemony's vast empire. The blue and green planet below showed the scars of conquest. Mining operations had stripped away forests and mountains. The oceans were being drained for their minerals. Vexstar's forearms moved across multiple control panels as he read through the efficiency reports. The humans had put up a decent fight, which made the victory more satisfying. Their technology was primitive but functional, and their industrial capacity was impressive for such a young species. "Sir," his aide reported, "the mining operations are ahead of schedule. You should be able to move on to the next target within 2 standard cycles," Good Vexstar replied, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The humans served their purpose. The resistance was entertaining but brief. He dismissed the aide and turned back to his reports. The hegemony had conquered thousands of worlds, and each one followed the same pattern. Resistance, defeat, integration into the empire. The humans had been no different, despite their unusual fighting spirit. But far out in the cold darkness beyond Pluto's orbit, something the hegemony had missed was still watching. Captain Minsu floated in his damaged escape pod, life support systems running on emergency power. His ship had been destroyed in the final battle, but his pod had drifted far enough to avoid detection. Through the small window, he could see the distant lights of hegemony ships around Earth. They moved like insects, stripping away everything that had once been beautiful about his home. The sight filled him with a rage so pure it seemed to burn in his chest. Minsu had been crying when he first saw the enemy ships descend on Earth. He had watched his world burn and felt helpless to stop it. In the void, watching the systematic destruction of everything he had ever loved, the tears had stopped. They had frozen into something harder, colder, more dangerous. His pod's emergency beacon was still active, but he had turned it off long ago. He did not want to be rescued. He wanted to remember. Every day he watched the hegemony ships through his window and memorized their patterns. He studied their technology, learned their weaknesses, and planned. The galaxy thought humanity was dead. The Confederation had marked Earth as fallen. The hegemony celebrated another easy victory, but they were all wrong. Humanity was not dead. It was just getting started. Technician Yuna rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the sensor display again. The numbers made no sense. She had been working at Deep Space Monitoring Station Zeta-7 for 5 years, and she had never seen readings like this before. "Supervisor Kim," she called across the control room. "I need you to look at this." Kim walked over, his heavy boots echoing in the quiet station. Zeta-7 was small, with only 12 crew members, and it was located far from any major trade routes. Most days were boring, filled with routine scans of empty space and asteroid fields. "What is it?" Kim asked, leaning over Yuna's shoulder to look at her screen. "Energy signature," Yuna said, pointing at the data. Appeared for 37 seconds, then just disappeared. Like someone turned off a light switch. Kim frowned. The signature was powerful, suggesting a large ship or industrial facility. But according to their charts, there was nothing in that area except empty space and a few dead asteroids. "Equipment malfunction," he suggested. "I ran diagnostics 3 times, Yuna replied. "Everything checks out." The signature was real, but now it's gone. Kim made a note in the daily log. Strange readings were not uncommon in deep space. Solar flares, gravitational anomalies, and equipment failures could create all sorts of false signals. He marked it as an unexplained phenomenon and moved on. But across the galaxy, similar reports were appearing in official databases. A hegemony. Supply convoy had reported communication problems before going silent near the Vega system. A patrol ship had found empty space where an asteroid mining operation should have been running. Mining equipment worth millions of credits had simply vanished. The Confederation's intelligence analysts reviewed these reports during their weekly briefings. They saw patterns in the data, but the patterns made no sense. The incidents were too scattered, too random to suggest organized activity. "Space is dangerous," Chief Analyst Rowe concluded. "Equipment fails, ships get lost, accidents happen. These are just statistical anomalies." But Captain Sojin knew better. She was running her cargo hauler through the outer edges of hegemony space, carrying refugees who had escaped from conquered worlds. Her ship was old and slow, but it was quiet, and quiet ships survived longer in dangerous territory. Sojin had been hiding in the shadow of a gas giant when she saw something that changed everything. A ship emerged from behind a dead moon, moving with deadly purpose toward a hegemony fuel depot. The ship was clearly of human design, but it had been changed. Modified with armor plating and weapons that looked like they had been torn from enemy vessels. The attack was fast and brutal. The human ship struck the fuel depot with precision, destroying the defense platforms and storage tanks in minutes. Then, before the hegemony reinforcements could arrive, it vanished back into the darkness. Between the stars, Sojin tried to contact the mystery ship, broadcasting on all human frequencies. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice answered, speaking in perfect Korean. "Tell the galaxy," the voice said. "Calm and cold. The fire still burns." The transmission ended, and the ship disappeared into hyperspace. Sojin sat in her pilot's chair for a long time, staring at the burning wreckage of the fuel depot. The galaxy thought humanity was dead. She had thought so too. But someone was still out there, still fighting. Far away. In the cold darkness of the Orc cloud at the edge of the Sol system, Lieutenant Junho worked in the belly of his ship. The vessel had once been a Earth Defense Corps patrol boat, fast and lightly armed. Now it looked like a predator, covered in armor plating torn from destroyed hegemony cruisers. Junho's hands moved with practiced skill as he welded another piece of salvaged metal to his ship's hull. The work was slow and dangerous, but he had learned patience during his 3 years in the void. Around him, other human survivors worked on their own vessels, transforming refugee ships and escape pods into instruments of war. The hidden base was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Invisible to most sensors, dozens of modified ships floated in its docking bays, each one a ghost from humanity's past, reborn as something harder and more dangerous. The survivors rarely spoke while they worked. Words were not necessary. They all shared the same memories of Earth's fall, the same burning need for revenge. They had watched their world die. That pain had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. Junho finished his welding and stepped back to examine his work. The ship no longer looked human. It looked like something that had crawled out of the darkness between stars, hungry and ready to hunt. He activated his communicator and spoke to the other survivors in the base. Ghost 7 is ready for deployment, he reported. Waiting target. Assignment. The response came from a voice he recognized as Captain Minsu, the man who had been drifting in space when Earth fell. Minsu had become their leader, the one who coordinated their strikes against hegemony targets. Proceed to Grid 77, Alpha, Minsu ordered. Supply convoy expected in 48 hours. Make it look like an accident. Understood, Junho replied. He climbed into his ship and started the engines. The hegemony thought they had killed humanity, but they were wrong. They had only made it stronger, angrier. It got infinitely more dangerous. Captain Daeun expected another boring day when his patrol ship dropped out of hyperspace near the Kepler Nebula. The Confederation vessel Swift Current was on a routine mission, scanning for asteroid miners and pirates in the colorful gas clouds. Instead, alarms started blaring across his bridge. Captain, his sensor officer called out, voice tight with confusion. We have multiple contacts. They just appeared around us. Daeun looked at the tactical display and felt his blood turn cold. 6 ships surrounded them in a perfect formation, each one pointed directly at his vessel. The ships were clearly built by humans, but they looked wrong. They had been changed, covered with extra armor and weapons that seemed to have been taken from other ships. Where did they come from? Daeun demanded. I don't know, sir, the sensor officer replied. They weren't there a second ago. It's like they were hiding in the nebula. Daeun had never seen stealth technology that advanced. His ship's sensors were military-grade, designed to detect any vessel within 100,000 kilometers. These ships had appeared from nowhere, close enough to destroy his patrol vessel before he could even send a distress signal. Known. Ships, he transmitted on all frequencies. This is Captain Daeun of the Confederation patrol vessel Swift Current. Identify yourselves immediately. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a voice answered, speaking standard galactic with a human accent. This is Strike Group Taigok, Captain Hyesu commanding. We need to talk. Daeun recognized the name. Daeun was an old Korean word, something to do with balance and harmony. But there was nothing harmonious about the ships surrounding him. They looked like predators waiting to strike. Permission to come aboard, the human captain continued. We have information the Confederation needs to hear. Against his better judgment, Daeun agreed. 20 minutes later, he found himself sitting across from a woman who looked like she had been through hell and survived. Captain Hyesu was tall and lean, with short black hair and scars across her face and hands. Her uniform was a patchwork of different materials, clearly repaired many times. She was not alone. 2 other humans accompanied her, both wearing the same modified uniforms and carrying the same hard expressions. They moved like soldiers, but there was something else in their eyes, something that made Daeun uncomfortable. 3 years ago, Hyesu began, the galaxy declared humanity dead. You marked Earth as fallen and moved on. But you were wrong. She activated a portable holographic projector, and the conference room filled with a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots appeared across hegemony territory, each one pulsing like a heartbeat. The Exodus Protocol, she explained, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of barely controlled anger. When Earth's orbital defenses fell, we knew the planet was lost, but we didn't just evacuate civilians. We scattered our military assets across every possible vector. Daeun studied the map. There were dozens of red markers spread across hundreds of star systems. Each one represented human survivors, and they were all deep in enemy territory. Each group was given specific targets and operational parameters, Hayasu continued. Supply lines, communication networks, industrial facilities. We've been learning the hegemony's weaknesses for 3 years. How many of you are there? Daeun asked. Hayasu's smile was cold and sharp. Enough the hegemony thinks they won a war against a primitive species. They actually just scattered us across the galaxy and gave us time to prepare. One of her companions stepped forward. He was older, with gray in his hair and burned scars on his arms. I'm Commander Yemen, former Earth Defense Corps. My group has been operating in the Outer Rim for 2 years. We've destroyed 17 supply depots and captured enough enemy technology to retrofit our entire fleet. The third human spoke up. She was younger, maybe in her 20s, but her eyes looked ancient. Lieutenant Salmon, Intelligence Division. We've been infiltrating hegemony communications networks. We know their patrol schedules, their supply routes, their defensive positions, everything. Daeun felt a chill run down his spine. These were not refugees fleeing from a lost war. These were hunters who had been stalking their prey for years, learning and adapting and growing stronger. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because the final phase is about to begin, Hayasu replied. The hegemony has grown comfortable. They think they're safe. They're about to learn how wrong they are. She touched a control on her projector, and the red dots on the map began moving, converging on major hegemony strongholds. We've been hitting small targets, staying hidden, learning their patterns, but we're not refugees anymore. We're an army, and we're ready to show the galaxy what happens when you try to exterminate humanity. Daeun looked at the map and realized he was seeing the beginning of something unprecedented. The hegemony had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy like this. They had never fought a species that refused to die, that turned defeat into a weapon. The galaxy needs to know, Hayasu said. The fire that burns in human hearts cannot be extinguished by conquest. It can only be scattered, and when it comes back together, it burns hotter than before. She stood up, her scarred face set in determination. Tell the Confederation to stay out of our way. We have work to finish. Fleet Admiral Korvek's S4 Arms moved rapidly across the control panels as he tried to make sense of the reports flooding into Hegemony High Command. The massive war room was filled with officers from dozens of conquered species, all working frantically to understand what was happening to their empire. Sector 7 reports another supply depot destroyed, called out one of his aides. That's the third one this week. Sector 12 has lost contact with mining station Alphanine, reported another. The automated systems show everything was normal. Then suddenly all communications stopped. Korvek's mandibles clicked with frustration. For 3 years the hegemony had enjoyed peace after conquering Earth. Their territory had expanded steadily, and their military machine had grown stronger with each victory. Now, suddenly, everything was falling apart. Intelligence Coordinator Zexamoth approached the Admiral's command platform, her 6 legs clicking against the metal floor. Her species was known for their analytical abilities, which was why the hegemony used them to study enemy patterns. Admiral, she said, her voice buzzing through her translator. I've analyzed all the recent incidents. This is not random piracy or equipment failure. Someone is targeting our supply infrastructure with surgical precision. She activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy with red markers indicating recent losses. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Fuel depots, ammunition stores, communication relays, shipyards, all the vital systems that kept the hegemony war machine running. They know exactly where to hurt us, Zexamoth continued. Whoever is doing this has detailed knowledge of our logistics network. What the hegemony didn't know was that Colonel Mingi was listening to their conversation from a hidden surveillance post on the edge of the system. She had been a computer science instructor at Seoul Military Academy before Earth fell, and she had spent the last 2 years doing what she did best, learning enemy systems and finding their weaknesses. Her fingers moved across a keyboard that looked like it had been built from spare parts. Multiple screens showed streams of data flowing through hegemony networks. She had become a ghost in their machines, invisible but always watching. Minji smiled as she watched the confusion in the enemy command center. They had no idea that every supply shipment, every patrol route, every defensive position was being recorded and analyzed. She had mapped their entire empire, and now that information was flowing to human strike groups across the galaxy. The messages were hidden in cosmic radiation patterns and embedded in stellar navigation data. To any observer, they looked like natural phenomena or routine scientific information. But to the human cells scattered throughout hegemony space, they were detailed battle plans in the Vega system. Commander Sang-hoon received one of those messages as his ship drifted in the shadow of an asteroid field. His destroyer had once been called the Busan Guardian, but now it bore the name Phoenix Rising, painted across its scarred hull. The ship looked like it had been through hell, because it had. Sang-hoon's crew had fought in dozens of battles. Over the past 2 years, hitting hegemony targets and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive, each victory had cost them something, but it had also made them stronger. Target confirmed, his tactical officer reported. Hegemony shipyard, lightly defended. 3 construction platforms and a fuel depot. Sang-hoon nodded. His crew was small, only 37 people, but they had learned to work with deadly efficiency. They were refugees who had lost everything when Earth fell, and they had turned their grief into a weapon. "Begin the attack," he ordered. The Phoenix Rising emerged from the asteroid field like a predator striking from ambush. Its weapons had been modified with hegemony technology salvaged from previous battles. The attack was swift and brutal, destroying the shipyard's defenses in minutes before vanishing back into the darkness. Meanwhile, in the Centauri cluster, Major Yoonju was completing a very different kind of mission. She and her team had spent 6 months posing as hegemony logistics contractors, using forged identification and carefully constructed cover stories. They looked like members of the Kolari species, thanks to advanced disguises and surgical modifications. They spoke the language perfectly and knew the cultural customs. To everyone around them, they were just another group of alien workers, keeping the hegemony supply chain running. But when they finally acted, the results were devastating. 3 massive fleet supply bases went dark simultaneously, their contents disappearing before the automated systems could even register what was happening. Weapons, fuel, spare parts, and food supplies were redistributed to human strike groups before the hegemony even knew they had been robbed. Yeonju watched from a safe distance as hegemony security forces arrived at the empty storage facilities. They would find nothing but vacant warehouses and confused workers who had no idea what happened. Across the galaxy, similar strikes were happening every day. The Confederation watched in amazement as hegemony territorial control began to fragment. Supply lines were cut, communications were disrupted, and military bases found themselves isolated and vulnerable. This was not the desperate terrorism of a defeated enemy. This was systematic warfare conducted by an enemy that had learned to fight in ways the hegemony couldn't understand. The humans had studied their conquerors for 3 years, learning every weakness and exploiting every flaw. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity had not died when Earth fell. It had only gone silent while it learned to become something new, a species that grew stronger through suffering and turned defeat into victory. Admiral O. Young-soo stood on the bridge of the Soul's Vengeance, watching the countdown timer reach 3 years ago, he had been a junior lieutenant on a patrol ship, barely old enough to command a shuttle. Now he was leading the largest coordinated attack in human history. The battleship around him was a patchwork of salvage technology and human engineering. It had been built from the wreckage of a dozen different vessels, welded together with determination and powered by the burning need for justice. The name Soul's Vengeance was painted across its hull in both Korean and standard Galactic. Promise that had taken 3 years to fulfill. Admiral, his communications officer, reported, all strike groups are in position. 47 systems, 238 ships ready for simultaneous attack. Young-soo nodded. The moment had finally arrived. Every human survivor scattered across the galaxy was about to reveal themselves at the same time. The hegemony had no idea what was coming. All groups. This is Command Actual. He transmitted on the secure human frequency. At the fire. Across the galaxy, the true scope of human survival revealed itself in a coordinated symphony of destruction. The Rigel system. Captain Jiang's stealth wing materialized around Hegemony Command Station Omega, like ghosts becoming solid. Her ships had been invisible, using technology reverse-engineered from captured enemy vessels. But now they dropped their stealth fields and opened fire with everything they had. The command station's shields flared and died under the concentrated assault. The Hegemony defenders scrambled to respond, but they were facing an enemy that had studied their every move for years. Every weakness had been mapped. Every defensive position analyzed and countered. In the Centauri sector, Colonel Sungmin's assault groups punched through the Hegemony's outer defensive lines with ships that looked like mechanical predators. Their hulls were covered in reactive armor plating and weapon systems salvaged from 100 different battles. Each ship told a story of survival and adaptation, of humans who had learned to turn their enemy's own technology against them. The Hegemony forces fought back desperately, but they were facing something they had never encountered before. It was not a traditional fleet engagement with predictable tactics. The humans moved like hunters who had finally cornered their prey. Using unconventional strategies and weapons that defied standard military doctrine at Hegemony Central Command, Fleet Admiral Krovex watched his empire crumble in real time. The tactical displays showed red warning lights appearing across dozens of systems simultaneously. His fortress worlds, his supply bases, his communication networks, everything was under attack at once. How is this possible? He demanded, his forearms gesturing wildly at the screens. We destroyed their homeworld, wiped out their civilization. His intelligence coordinator Zexamoth worked frantically at her console, trying to make sense of the chaos. Admiral, the attacks are too coordinated. They're hitting every critical system simultaneously. This level of planning would take years to organize, but they're dead. Korvex roared. We killed them all. The answer came from an unexpected source. Every communication screen in the command center suddenly displayed the same image, a human woman in a military uniform, standing against a background of stars. It was Admiral Park, the same woman whose final transmission had marked Earth's fall 3 years ago. But she was not speaking from Earth. She was somewhere else. Somewhere in the void between stars, and she was very much alive. Hegemony forces. Her voice carried across every frequency, reaching every ship and station in their empire. You made one mistake.
Ow.
You thought killing our world would kill our spirit. Instead, you scattered it across the stars, and now it burns in places you can never reach. Her image was calm, but her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. For 3 years you celebrated your victory over humanity. You thought we were extinct, but we were learning. We were adapting. We were becoming something you could never understand. The transmission showed images of human ships emerging from hyperspace around Hegemony's strongholds. Each vessel was unique, built from salvaged parts and driven by human determination. They moved with purpose, striking at carefully selected targets with surgical precision. We are not conquerors, Admiral Park continued. We are not here to build an empire. We are here to remind the galaxy that some fires cannot be extinguished by force. They can only be scattered, and when they come back together, they burn hotter than ever before. Commander Jinwoo, leading the Confederation fleet that had arrived to witness the battle, watched in amazement as the Hegemony's resistance collapsed. He had marked Earth as fallen 3 years ago, had mourned the loss of the human species. Now he was seeing them return as something the galaxy had never encountered. The human ships moved through, enemy formations like wolves hunting in a pack. They had learned to fight as one organism, each group supporting the others, each attack coordinated with deadly precision. The Hegemony's superior numbers meant nothing against an enemy that struck from the shadows and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. In the aftermath, as the smoke cleared from a dozen battlefields, humanity planted new flags among the ruins of the Hegemony's empire. But these were not flags of conquest. They were memorials. Markers of remembrance for the world that had been lost and the people who had died. Earth had fallen, but its children had learned to carry its fire wherever they wandered. The galaxy would never again mistake silence for surrender.